Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm Katie Simpson in Ottawa. Air Canada cancellations begin as flight attendants prepare to walk off the job.
Cancellations will proceed and grow in magnitude. By the time we get to 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, we'll be completely grounded.
Travel for hundreds of thousands of passengers could be disrupted if a deal isn't reached. We'll have the latest on the potential strike and what it could mean for Canadian businesses just ahead. And
these tariffs are unfair and unjustified. We lament the fact that Mark Carney has been so silent and so weak, failing to stand up for our farmers.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on the attack, blaming the Prime Minister for failing to stop China from putting a tariff on Canadian canola. What does this mean for farmers and how should the federal government respond? Plus,
it never made sense, this war. I'm there for one reason, to see if I can solve. I want to see if I can stop the killing.
U.S. President Donald Trump heading to Alaska for a high-stakes meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Will these talks bring an end to Russia's war in Ukraine? We'll look ahead to the highly anticipated summit. Power and Politics starts right now. More than 10,000 Air Canada flight attendants are preparing to walk off the job. A strike could start as early as this Saturday if the union and airline are unable to come to a deal. The CBC's Nicole Williams is standing by at Toronto Pearson Airport with the latest. Nicole, where do things stand now between the union and the airline?
I think it is fair to say after today, they are extremely far apart. These two sides had very intense interactions today, kind of with these dueling press conferences, starting with Air Canada executives talking to reporters this morning, trying to say that, you know, we have come to the table with an extremely fair deal. They say they've offered the union representing flight attendants a 38% wage increase over 4 years, as well as an offer to compensate for groundwork. As we know, flight attendants don't actually currently get paid for the work that they do prior to the doors of the flight closing. So they say their latest offer includes that. It is more than fair. And in fact, this latest proposal would make flight attendants for Air Canada the best paid flight attendants in this country.
We are still available to bargain at any time on the condition that the negotiation has substance. CUPE, for its part, while claiming at every turn they want to reach a deal, wasted 10 precious days, the last 21 days, by refusing to negotiate while they sought a strike mandate. They made the very last days of negotiations meaningless by making unsustainable offers.
Now, the weird thing that happened today, or the interesting thing that happened today, was that flight attendants actually interrupted this press conference. It was a little bit of a tense moment where the executives felt like they were being interrupted. Now, I have to say that the flight attendants, the union members, they didn't actually say anything. They just walked in front of the podium with signs saying, you know, unfair wages, unpaid wages. Regardless, Air Canada deciding to end the press conference right there because presumably they didn't want to give their flight attendants any more airtime on this issue. Now, CUPE had its own press conference today, and we're getting the sense that these two parties really don't seem to be agreeing at all, including what's actually being offered. Take a listen.
Their best offer to date at 8% would still put the junior flight attendants at $2,108 per month. This is still over $700 per month below minimum wage. Sadly, Air Canada has been absent from the bargaining table since Tuesday evening as the clock ticks down towards their lockout deadline of 1:30 a.m. Saturday. We, however, have never left the bargaining table.
So as I said, on one hand, Air Canada is saying 38% wage increase, the union saying we haven't seen such an offer. These two sides, like I said, don't seem to be anywhere close to a deal.
So at this point, what is the federal government saying about this dispute?
Well, Air Canada has actually asked the Minister of Jobs to step in at this point, to send the two parties to binding arbitration. Minister Patty Hajdu says she has in fact received this request. She has posed that question to the union, and just over an hour ago, she released a statement saying that the union has asked until tomorrow to consider doing this. In a statement, she says she has granted that request. She's wrote to the parties, "I strongly urge you to come to an agreement. Do not waste this precious time. Canadians are counting on you." Because as we've heard, if they do not come to an agreement, we will see 10,000 Air Canada flight attendants walk off the job, and we will see hundreds of thousands of airline passengers have their travel plans disrupted over the coming days.
All right, Nicole Williams at Toronto Pearson Airport, thank you.
You're welcome.
As we mentioned, Air Canada has warned a strike could disrupt travel for roughly 130,000 customers a day. Small businesses are raising concerns about the consequences of a potential strike. Dan Kelly is the president and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for joining us. I want to start. What are you hearing from small businesses in this moment that are concerned about a strike?
All sorts of stuff. Look, for some, it is the end of the busy travel season. So they've got customers that they're expecting to come in for the last couple of weeks of a summer vacation. And that could be lost. International travelers, travelers from the U.S. or the domestic travel. Secondly, we're hearing a ton from business travelers. This is moving into September. We've been pushing businesses to try to diversify their markets, expand their scope, find new suppliers or new customers in other provinces, or perhaps around the world other than the US. And at this very vulnerable moment, we're now taking out one of those options for business owners to meet with customers or meet with new suppliers from around the world.
You talk about how vulnerable businesses are in this moment. When you take a look at sort of the threat related to tariffs and all of the uncertainty the Canadian economy is facing right now, how much more complicated do things get with the possibility of a strike with Air Canada?
Yeah, look, for my members, I've got 100,000 small businesses as members of CFIB across the country. They haven't had a normal month of sales in 5 years, from the pandemic to the other major rail and port strikes that we faced, to now the tariff disputes with China and the US. And then we add anything else, Canada Post disruptions or the Air Canada strike. I mean, I don't know how many more knocks these guys can take. It is getting really dicey. There are a lot of businesses riding on the edge right now. A strong wind could blow over a bunch of small businesses right now. And, this is just not the time for this kind of thing. Air Canada is just too big and too important. I got to say, quite apart from that, over 10 years, we gave unions more and more power, basically tipping the scale. So employers, especially federally regulated employers, virtually have no powers left. And then we wonder why we're facing these kinds of things. We're turning into France with strikes on major utilities all the time.
What do you want to see the federal government do in this moment?
It needs to step in. I'm happy to hear that the parties apparently seem willing to stay at the table. But if they're not able to get a deal, then the federal government has to immediately step in. They can't let this drag on as they have with some of the other strikes for a few weeks and kick the tires to see whether the parties are serious or not. The economy's too vulnerable for that to happen, and somebody's got to stick up for the economy, for the travelers that would be stranded, for the customers of Air Canada that are counting on getting to their end destination, either for tourism purposes, which is so important, or for business travel. Somebody's got to represent them, and gosh, we're hoping the federal government leans in and makes that happen.
In statements we have seen from the jobs minister, it sort of seems that the approach at this moment is the best kind of deal is one that's negotiated at the table. Do you think jumping in right away, and even if it does get to the point where there is a strike, there is some disruption, should there not be some space given to see if there can be an agreement reached?
Yeah, look, but we've been giving space for that to happen for weeks and weeks and weeks. I don't know why we have to wait until essentially the evening before basically a business is shut down for governments to take action, because travelers are having to make decisions now. They're canceling stuff now. And we can't just gamble and wait to see what happens on Saturday, whether they're serious or not. I get that the government is on a delicate balancing act here because they obviously want deals to be made by the parties. That is, I agree with the statement that those are the best deals. But where that doesn't seem possible, the federal government can't afford right now for the economy to take it on the chin.
What advice would you give to small business owners right now trying to deal with this uncertainty?
Well, the advice we're giving is, look, they've got to find alternates, although those alternates are running out. We don't have a lot of domestic competition in the airline industry. We have two or three major players. And so there's just not a lot of capacity in the system to shift hundreds of thousands of customers per day to some of these options. So do that where you can, look at virtual options. But my goodness, if you're trying to develop a new trading relationship right now and you've got an appointment booked overseas or in another province in the next few days, yet again, we're going to be saying, well, the economies will just have to adjust. We can't keep doing that.
What is in this moment, what are you hearing from small businesses in terms of how they're trying to mitigate this?
Look, business owners are scrambling on all sorts of fronts, trying to find new customers where if they're affected by tariffs. The economy is struggling so much just with the uncertainty over U.S. tariffs that any more uncertainty over major pieces of our transportation infrastructure just can't happen. And that's why this is so desperately needed. But business owners are calling and saying, what am I going to do? How am I going to facilitate this appointment? I've got a customer or a key supplier coming in for a meeting. I can't afford to miss that opportunity. And yet there they are.
All right, Dan Kelly with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thank you for your time.
Anytime at all.
Tomorrow, all eyes will be on the international showdown happening in Alaska.
We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I want to see if I can stop the killing.
Up next, the growing concern about what might actually come out of the Trump-Putin meeting. We'll speak with an expert to walk us through expectations. Final preparations are underway for the high-stakes meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. The U.S. and Russian leaders will arrive in Alaska for their face-to-face tomorrow.
I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I think it's going to be very interesting. We're going to find out where everybody stands, and I'll know within the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, or 5 minutes, like we tend to find out whether or not we're going to have a good meeting or a bad meeting.
Trump has urged both Russia and Ukraine to reach a ceasefire agreement, warning both countries there will have to be an exchange of territory. His unconventional pressure and negotiation tactics have so far failed to secure a peace deal. For a look ahead to the summit, we are joined by Keir Giles. He's a senior consulting fellow with the Russia and Eurasia program for Chatham House and is the author of the book, Who Will Defend Europe? Thank you very much for speaking with us. I want to start sort of broadly speaking. Realistically, what are you expecting tomorrow?
I don't think anybody should be predicting anything at all from this summit because it is at this moment wild guesswork. There are so many different balls in the air, so many different things that Putin could demand and Donald Trump might be willing to give him, that it's really wild speculation to say what could come out of it. The one thing I think we can be confident of is that although this is ostensibly a summit about Ukraine, that won't be the main topic of conversation because there are so many other things that Russia wants from the West, either in cooperation with the United States or as part of its long war against Europe and the West as a whole, that they'll probably be looking for more from this than just a settlement in Ukraine. In fact, that might be the least likely thing that will come out of this meeting tomorrow.
So with that context in mind, what are your biggest concerns heading into the meeting?
There are so many different concerns. If we look at the wish list that Russia has stated consistently, not just over the last 3 years, but over decades, it is all about giving Russia a free hand with the countries that it sees as part of its former empire that it wants to exert control over. And that, in turn, means removing the United States as an obstacle to that, whether as presence in Europe, whether as a member of NATO, whether simply standing in the way of Russia when it seeks to achieve its objectives. All of those things are what Russia wants to get rid of, and Donald Trump has expressed willingness to actually remove them for Putin in the past. That's the biggest concern, how far Putin would go and how far Trump would go to meet him.
That point that you just made there, removing the U.S. as an obstacle, even though it was Russia that started this unprovoked war, the way that U.S. President Donald Trump has talked about the conflict, in some cases, he does seem to recast the history of events. Given the way that Donald Trump talks about this, what are your concerns for Ukraine in this moment?
Well, that's quite right. Donald Trump and his envoy, Stephen Witkoff, have proved themselves only too willing to repeat the lies and the disinformation and the manipulation of history that we hear from Russia that makes all of Russia's position seem perfectly reasonable because they miscast what has happened in the past. And we know that Putin is an excellent master at doing this, at spinning a tale, at creating the impression that what he wants is actually perfectly reasonable. So if Donald Trump comes away from this one-to-one meeting thinking that actually the United States and NATO are the problem and what Russia is demanding is actually perfectly reasonable, that's a severe danger for all of the United States' allies at the moment.
In the days leading up to this meeting, we have seen European allies rally around Ukraine's president. What should those allies really be thinking in this moment as they provide some sort of support for Ukraine?
Well, on the one hand, what the Allies have done in this last-minute panic scramble to try and get some factual basis into the conversation is the most they can do, trying to establish in Donald Trump's minds the basic facts about what can and cannot be given away in this meeting with Putin. But on the other hand, that's also an indication of how little those European allies have done over the past months and years to actually prepare for this moment. And there's no excuse for that. We were in exactly the same situation 6 months ago in February with direct talks over a ceasefire in Ukraine and Europe then being shown to be completely unready to insert itself into the conversation, to make itself relevant to a conversation about its own future. 6 months have passed and again there's the same panic, there's the same realization that they're not in a position to influence the outcome.
This is a program that has a Canadian audience. I'm just curious, do you think there's any role for Canada to play in this moment?
Well, one of the things that has been ongoing throughout the non-US members of NATO is a search for leadership, a search for somebody that will actually take the reins and show where this organization needs to go in this new reality where the United States cannot be counted on as the cornerstone of the alliance. Now, previously, we were looking to Eastern Europe for that, for those countries that understood where the threat was coming from and were doing the most about it. We were thinking of countries like Finland and Poland that would step up and take the reins and show the direction. But now, of course, you have Canada emerging as a player in that right as well, simply because we now have threats from two directions. We have problems from east and west. And there's a big difference between how Mark Carney has dealt with the Trump problem to how most European leaders have. There's a choice that all of these European leaders face, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as well, whether to play along with Trump, to pander to him, to pretend that everything is normal, or to attempt to inject some reality into the conversation. Each leader has chosen his own way, but Canada is very much showing the way and gathering a lot of respect for how exactly it's dealing with the United States at the moment.
So do you think that Canada has taken the path of trying to inject some facts into some descriptions of reality into the conversation? Is that your position here?
With discretion, yes, but very much more so than a lot of the European countries have that are rolling over and pandering to Trump at every possible opportunity, playing up the role of Trump in bringing about these ceasefire negotiations, trying to suggest that he's making a positive contribution to reaching a settlement with Russia instead of being the biggest danger that Russia might actually be handed Europe on a plate.
I know that you've mentioned that so much about what is going to happen in this meeting isn't necessarily focused on ending the war, but are there any indications that you see that Russian President Vladimir Putin is motivated to stop his invasion?
There's no reason at all to think that Putin is motivated to stop. He's had plenty of opportunities given to him by Trump to pocket the gains that his country and its war machine have made in Ukraine, freeze the conflict, solidify the line of contact, and give his armed forces a breathing space. But he's not taken any of them, despite Donald Trump essentially agreeing to most of Russia's demands anyway. Plainly, Putin thinks he can get more from fighting on, and we shouldn't forget that there are very different objectives at play in these discussions about a peace settlement. Donald Trump says he wants peace. European powers say they want the war to end. Vladimir Putin and Russia, on the other hand, they want to win the war, and they see ceasefire negotiations as a means of getting closer to their war aims rather than bringing the conflict to an end.
I recognize that we cannot predict outcomes from this meeting, but I'm curious, what will you be looking for in terms of something that might be a signal that the meeting was perhaps productive?
It will be productive. There's no doubt about that. The only problem is whether it is productive solely for Russia. So we need to read between the lines of all of the summit communiques that come out, and I'm expecting that there will be a repeat of all of the previous interactions between Trump and Putin, where we get very different stories being told by the Russian side and by the United States. And which of those turns out to be true will only become clear over the subsequent days and weeks.
Keir Giles, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
They say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But new numbers show Canadian tourists who usually visit Sin City are actually staying home. Up next, the latest on how the trade war is hurting a tourism hotspot. China is taking aim at Canadian canola farmers. Beijing's new tariff on exports of raw canola from Canada at a rate of nearly 76% are now in place. Chinese officials accuse Canada of dumping cheap canola into their market. However, it is widely believed this is in retaliation over Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles.
Now we're calling on the federal government to take immediate action to help canola growers during this unprecedented situation. The Chinese government has clearly launched the tariffs at this time of year to cause maximum impact and maximum uncertainty.
To get a better sense of how this is affecting Canadian producers, we are joined by Rick White, the CEO of the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Thank you very much, Mr. White, for taking the time to speak with us. I'm wondering if you can put into perspective what a big deal this is for Canadian canola producers.
Well, Katie, it's a very big deal for Canadian farmers that grow canola. We're looking at China here. Last year, exports to China are #2 destination for exports for canola. We exported 5.9 million metric tons of seed to that country last year, worth $4 billion. We also sent $1 billion worth of oil and meal last year as well. Total value of all the products are $4.9 billion. We're halted now, and the new tariffs that came into place has halted all China exports of canola into China.
So what are you hearing so far about the impact this is having on the ground?
Well, there's a lot of concern, a lot of anxiety because farmers put in their crop and it's in the field right now. It's grown and they'll be harvesting it soon. There's nothing they can do about it. They're going to take off the crop that they've seeded. And the big question is with a lack of demand now of almost 6 million tons because of China shutting the door on seed, the question is where is that canola going to find a home? Because that is a very large part of our export program. And farmers are going to have that available in their bins.
Is there anything farmers can do in this moment to try to mitigate the impact? Do they have any levers they can pull?
Well, they're just going to have to wait and see. Some of them will have forward priced, fortunately, anticipated production. Some farmers do that. Not all farmers do that. So some will have already managed their risk to some degree, but it certainly won't be covering all the risk that's going to be here in terms of price. But there's two things to this. There could be a price effect, likely a price effect. That will come sooner probably rather than later. So the value per ton will likely go down and sag for periods of time. And then the other is will farmers be able to sell all that they produced? Or are they going to not, there's going to be too much canola and they'll have to hold some for next year. There's a cost to that too. So not only on the price side, but on the availability to market their grain could come into question too.
Now, Beijing claims this is a result of Canada dumping cheap canola into their market. What do you say to China's claim?
Well, CCJ has participated in the investigation on the anti-dumping that China had launched. As part of that, we provided them with extensive evidence and data showing that farmers are economically making money. They are not dumping their seed into the Chinese market or any other market, that farmers are profitable from growing canola. Cost of production is below what they earn on the crop. And so China's accusations are unfounded in our view, but they have neglected to take the evidence as we have presented it and have come up with their own assumptions and analysis, which in their view resulted in a preliminary tariff determination that we've got right now.
So while Chinese government officials say one thing to sort of justify this tariff, it's widely believed that this is in retaliation to Canada's tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, that 100% tariff. Do you think the Canadian government should reconsider that EV tariff on Chinese electric vehicles if it will spare canola farmers?
Right, and that is a political question, and this is a political problem. So I don't have any political answer for you here about what they should do, but we do know that this is not a canola dumping problem now. It's very clear to us. This is a political problem, and it needs a political solution. And so I think what we've been calling for is the federal government to, you know, get working on politically motivating and negotiating with China to make this go away. I don't know what would be on the table, Katie. That would be up to the government because that's a political decision and calculation that they'll have to make. But farmers should not be left on their own to bear it on the chin.
Have you had any outreach from the federal government in terms of support for farmers? How would you rate how the government has sort of been handling this from your perspective?
Well, so far, they're taking it very, very seriously. You know, we're in contact, constant contact. Mind you, the last couple of days have been filled with media from our perspective, but we have got in a couple of conversations at the federal level, federal officials. They're taking it very, very seriously, so that is important. Everybody's trying to understand where we're at, where we're going, what the impact is, what the risk is, what support might be needed. So there's a lot of conversations going on, and they're going to continue on as long as this preliminary determination of 75.8% tariff is in place. And, you know, we're just going to have to continue those conversations in a very open, frank, and honest way with them.
Are there supports you need from the federal government right now that you're not getting?
Well, we have publicly and with the government directly continued to say that federal support for farmers and the industry may be needed here. And that could include compensatory support for the economic loss incurred by farmers for this particular year. We're not looking for a subsidy, but we are looking for farmers that if they are going to take some significant economic losses here, that we think it's the responsibility of the Canadian government to at least try to keep them whole.
Do you have any hope that this can be solved quickly, or are you bracing for long-term economic pain?
Well, in discussions with the federal government, I mean the long-term process is to continue to go through the anti-dumping process, wait for the final determination or anticipate the final determination to come in about 3 to 4 months. So if these preliminary duties are established as final determination in 3 to 4 months by China, then that opens up the door now for would open up the door for Canada to launch a WTO complaint. That process will take a long time. We see from the barley example where China did this to Australia, barley, exactly the same thing. Australia ended up with their tariffs in place for 3 years before it was finally taken to the WTO, and on the eve of the WTO announcing their decision, a deal was struck. That was a 3-year process of when the duty was put in the first place. I hope we're not on that track. We need to find a shorter way to get there, and that's the political solutions that need to be worked as well. We have to do and go through all of this and plan for the long term, but we need to do some short-term measures here to see if we can short-circuit this thing.
Okay, Rick White, the CEO of the Canadian Canola Growers Association, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Katie.
Prime Minister Mark Carney published a statement today responding to these tariffs, calling them unjustified. He said, in part, Canada does not dump canola. Canadian canola products meet the highest standards and our inspection systems are robust. We will advance a constructive dialogue with Chinese officials to address our respective trade concerns while diversifying our trade abroad and supporting our canola producers at home. Canada is also grappling with tariffs from the U.S. on a much wider scale. And while the government has imposed some retaliatory tariffs, Canadians are also personally retaliating. Just look at Las Vegas. The CBC's JP Tasker is on that story. He's in Washington this week. JP, we know that many Canadians are boycotting U.S. travel, and it appears that Las Vegas has certainly noticed.
Yeah, Katie, Canadian travel to the United States has plummeted since the outbreak of the Trump trade war, as you well know. And one place that's been particularly hard hit is Las Vegas. Sin City is in a slump, and Canadians are partly to blame. Now, travel in Vegas is down about 11%, according to some of the figures that we've gotten from the Visitors and Convention Center. We can show our audience some of these figures. Some Americans are holding back, as well because of some higher fees. There's fewer perks for gamblers. But when you look at the airline data, you can see there has been an even sharper decline in the number of Canadians. The number of Air Canada passengers, that's down 33% year over year. WestJet, the largest Canadian carrier to Vegas, their traffic is off about 31%. And then low-cost carrier Flair, it's off a stunning 62% year over year. And so the casinos are hurting, their stocks are down, and some of the CEOs of these major resorts are specifically mentioning Canada as the reason for their softer than expected results. I listened in on their quarterly conference calls, and the CEO of MGM Resorts said Canadian traffic has dropped off since the beginning of the year. There was a major dip after Trump launched the trade war, and it hasn't recovered. The leader of Caesars Entertainment, another major operator along the Strip, says Canadians are a big reason why there are so many rooms that have gone empty over the last number of months. So I can tell you that this phenomenon has not gone unnoticed by some of the casino bigwigs.
So Las Vegas thrives on tourism. So how is this affecting the local economy?
Yeah, I spoke to some regular Vegas goers. Many Canadians love the place, of course. They love to gamble and wine and dine and take in the shows. It's the ultimate adult playground. But the folks I spoke to say, they just can't stomach going there right now. They can't in good conscience spend their hard-earned cash. They'd like to go elsewhere, Europe and the Caribbean. And so I spoke to one expert at the University of Nevada to find out just what sort of impact this has had on the local economy. He crunched the numbers for me very generously, and he found that Canadians contributed about $3.6 billion US to the local economy last year, supporting 43,000 jobs in Las Vegas alone. That's more than manufacturing. That's more than the utility sectors. It's nearly as big as what the major Air Force base in the region contributes. And that's saying something because they have 15,000 military personnel working on that base. So, if this boycott continues, there could be job losses. And that's really a problem because Nevada, it already has the second highest unemployment rate in the U.S. Katie?
All right, JP Tasker in Washington, thank you.
Thank you.
With all of these tariffs from the U.S. and China, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is on the attack.
What Beijing's latest attack on our economy shows is that countries smell weakness. Mark Carney has been failing. He's failed. He's backed down. He's made concession after concession.
Coming up, what the Power Panel thinks the federal government should be doing in response to China's canola tariffs. U.S. President Donald Trump called out Canada again today from the Oval Office.
And Mexico does what we tell them to do, and Canada does what we tell them to do, because we have the two borders. We have the northern border, the southern border, and they were both horrible.
While Canada and the U.S. have yet to reach a trade deal, Canada is now dealing with a new separate tariff problem. China hit Canada with nearly 76% tariffs on canola seed, a tax that could crush the industry for Western producers. It's widely believed the move is in response to Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles imposed a year ago by the Liberals under Justin Trudeau. When asked about these tariffs, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre accused the current Liberal government of ignoring the problem.
I think we should look at ways we can penalize the regime in Beijing for targeting our farmers. I mean, so far, Mark Carney has said nothing about the canola producers. It's like he doesn't care about Western Canadian producers. You know, I had my team check his Twitter account. He hasn't tweeted a single thing about canola, yet he's been able to tweet about International Cat Day. So isn't that nice?
In the hours since Poilievre spoke this morning, the Prime Minister did post about the canola tariffs, saying Canada will engage in conversations with China while diversifying trade abroad. It is now time for the Power Panel. Let's bring in James Moore. He's a former Conservative cabinet minister. Cameron Ahmad is the former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Zain Velji is a campaign strategist. Cameron, I'm going to go to you first. What do you make of those accusations there from Pierre Poilievre in terms of how the current Liberal government has been dealing with this tariff issue with China?
Well, okay. First of all, the tone clearly has not changed. He's, I think, fighting for relevance and political survival at the moment. So he is defaulting to what he does best, which is take an aggressive tone and attack the government. I don't think that Canadians are ready to buy that just yet. I mean, anyone following even cursory coverage of the president and how he's behaving with other countries with regard to trade can understand that the situation is extremely volatile and the government is literally doing everything it can to, or at least that it thinks it can, to try and resolve the situation. Many other countries, pretty much every other country is in a similar situation as us. And of course, we're more exposed than others. So I don't think that this tone is people are gonna buy what he's saying. That said, he does have to provide an alternative, or he has to talk about the issue, and I think he can do so in a probably more constructive way. Obviously, the announcement by China is another huge problem for the government and something that they have to resolve, but it's a lot more complex, I think, than what he's laying out.
James,
more than a tweet.
James, what do you make of Cameron's critique there?
Fair in one sense, but there's a flip side to the same coin, right? Which is, we do have regional economies in this country, and a lot of Canadians are very provincial, small p provincial in the way in which they view the country. And then they do comparison analysis of how different parts of the country are treated relative to others. The Prime Minister was very quick to go to auto plants in Ontario and to show solidarity with them. He was very quick to go to Quebec steel and aluminum industries and to meet with workers who are going to be impacted by the unfair 232 tariffs that are happening in the United States. And the Prime Minister of this country at all times has an obligation to keep his eye on the ball when it comes to national unity and national perspective. We already know the tensions that exist in Western Canada over the past 10 years and how this Liberal government has dealt with in a very aggressive way, in a very jaundiced way, sort of poking at the energy sector in this country. And Scott Moe, I think, has been helpful. He's actually been one of the voices who's been helpful to Prime Minister Carney in the past. So I think people who are in these regions and who are in these industries and who are affected by this, they look to how the government is going to treat other industries in other regions, and they want some equal treatment. They want some sense of balance, not only rhetorically but in terms of substance. And it's a genuine public policy problem for the Prime Minister, because we don't have an endless bottomless pit of money. This chatter about a $60, $70, $80 billion deficit in the budget this fall is not sustainable. And we can't subsidize every industry who's being hit unfairly. We have to come up with better public policy tools to make sure we create Canadian jobs through world sales. So it's a very tough policy analysis, but Pierre Poilievre's criticism should be seen as more of a warning shot to the Prime Minister about his obligations to national unity, and I think he'll heed that warning.
Zain, what do you make of the tone we heard from the Conservative leader today, and do you anticipate that, this is what we're going to see more of when everyone comes back to Ottawa in the fall?
Yeah, and firstly, before we get ahead of ourselves, happy International Cat Day to all those that are celebrating. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Yeah, we are, Katie. Like, Pierre Poilievre is Pierre Poilievre. As much as, people like me have been talking about the Pierre Poilievre rehabilitation plan for the last 3 years, it's not going to happen. And, I agree with part of what Cam's putting on the table, which is the tone that Pierre Poilievre has struck now during the election, last couple of years, it came back to bite him in this election. I think that is very much clear in the result of this election, in this very acute moment where the comparison to Trump was made. So, there might be something on tone. But I don't necessarily agree that Pierre Poilievre needs to propose alternatives. As much as I hate to say that, and as cynical as I may sound, the job of Pierre Poilievre is to critique. He's official opposition leader, or will be once again very soon. And the core components of the job are not to provide these alternatives, but it's to find the soft tissue in the government. And I hate to say it, but he's on to something, because James' point is correct on national unity and Western alienation. And in addition to that, he's on to something, Pierre Poilievre is, on the type of deal that Canada may ultimately get with Trump. Because if he keeps on this track, there's a very good chance that Pierre Poilievre lands or crystallizes a three-word slogan in and around a tariff-free deal. Because it's not just any deal we need with the U.S. Mark Carney's raised the bar so much in terms of what he's going to deliver that we need a good deal. This is not Keir Starmer signing the first deal available to him. Because this is dragged on and we've blown a few deadlines, Pierre Poilievre now has the ability to hold Mark Carney's feet to the fire to say we need a high-quality deal, arguably even a tariff-free deal. Is that an impossibly high standard? You bet it is, but that's the job of the soon-to-be, once again, official opposition leader, as much as I'm not a fan of one Pierre Poilievre.
Cameron, how do you respond to both the point there made by James and Zane about, concerns around Western alienation?
They're good points, and I don't actually think there's a lot of daylight between what we believe and what we're saying. I definitely see the vulnerability for the government when it comes to Western alienation, especially with the latest impact of the Chinese tariff on canola. I mean, this is millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, a huge component of our economy, and one of our biggest exporting industries and markets. So the Prime Minister and the government absolutely need to show action on this. I don't know how easy it is for them to arrive to a solution, because it's a very complicated situation, and I mean it's difficult for them to solve. But they have to show that they treat this with the same urgency and care and importance as they do any other industry, any other major industry in the country, as they've done since the beginning, since the election. I just quibble a bit with what Zane's saying about the role of the official opposition. I mean, yes, that is what official oppositions do. That is what opposition parties do in every country, in every context, is they criticize. But I think there is a more constructive way to go about it. Whether or not it's what happens, we can still say that it's a better way to operate, to propose not just alternatives for the sake of proposing alternatives, but things that they believe are constructive. To the Conservatives' credit, they did make an announcement today about EVs. I don't agree with it. I think we can pick that apart. But it is more constructive in a democracy for political parties to debate substance than to just throw mud at each other.
James, one thing that Cameron mentioned there, when we sort of take into the context of, dealing with the Chinese tariffs, this is not the first time China's gone after Canada's canola farmers. This is something that seems to sort of pop up, every once in a while. It happened during Justin Trudeau's government when, there was the lead up to the possibility of trade talks. From your perspective, what is it that the Carney government can be doing in this moment to try to deal with China? Should they be taking a look at the tariffs on Chinese EVs?
The truth is, I don't know, because it's clear that Canada historically has been used as a bit of a pawn in the Chinese larger game. I mean, China sees Canada as a G7 partner and a trading partner with the United States, and they bounce things off Canada to send a message to the broader world and to the Anglosphere in general, and particularly to the United States. So it's not clear that this is sort of a rational public policy that we can sort of mitigate our way through and out of. So it's a real tough nut for the Prime Minister to crack. With regard to EVs and the EV ban, look, the EV mandate, which, Pierre Poilievre criticized today and deserves to be criticized, it's an awful public policy that's doomed to failure. And the idea that we would then sort of end the either ZEVs, zero emission vehicles, or EVs, electric vehicles from China, and allow them to pour into Canada and then find their way into the United States through CUSMA or NAFTA, just as we're on the doorstep of renegotiating NAFTA, thereby cannibalizing the massive R&D investments and capital investments that companies in the United States have made in order to stand up their EV capacity, would be devastating to our capacity to negotiate a renegotiation of the CUSMA agreement. That is not strategically smart. So canola is important to Canada, critically important to Saskatchewan and the Prairie provinces for sure, but within the context of where we are with the United States and CUSMA, if you open the door to Chinese EVs to come into Canada, and the market price for those is about a half to a third of what EVs that are made in North America cost, and they pour into the United States under CUSMA or NAFTA, you're going to have a very angry United States who will want to shut the door to Canada because they'll see us as a province of China, not an independent country.
That is one thing that Donald Trump, based in my perch normally in Washington, I would say Donald Trump and the White House would have words for Canada on that. Zane, I want to get to the point that James just made there. Actually, Zane, I'm going to go to you in just a moment. I want to get Cameron really quickly to respond, if I may. When we're talking more broadly about the plan to phase out gas-powered vehicles that the previous Liberal government did put into place, James called it an awful policy doomed for failure. I suspect you disagree, and I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yes. Well, I do agree with what he just said about Chinese electric vehicles and the impact that would have on our trading relationship with the United States. However, I think the mandate that the previous government put into place, which other countries also have versions of. No, we're not the only country to have this. The European countries, New Zealand, I believe, a number of others have them. They have softened their policies on incentives, for example, but many have maintained the mandates. Look, things may need to change. The context economically and global trade context has changed dramatically since that policy was brought in. But I think the way that the Conservative leader presented it today is typical in the way he talks about any environmental policy, short-sighted, misleading, and simplistic. Not the way James talked about it, the way that Keir Giles talked about it. There is a bigger opportunity for Canadians if we properly develop the industrial this industrial policy across the supply chain for electric vehicles, because we need to stay competitive, because we've already made so many huge investments in them, and because global EV sales are still accelerating around the world, not just in China, but in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the UK, in South America, and India. So do we want Canada to have a long-term place in this growing important industry, or do we want to fall behind? Do we want to offer consumers more choice? Do we want to offer them better vehicles? Should we maybe tweak the policy and increase the incentives? Probably.
Zane, we've got 45 seconds left. I'm going to give it last to you. What should the government be considering in this moment when it comes to China?
They should be considering that the answer to canola tariffs is not going to be back into the wheat fields of Western Alberta. They're going to have to find another measure. And I agree with my colleagues. This is not about EVs. Throwing Chinese EVs, even at half the tariff rate, back into the Canadian ecosystem, yes, will increase EV demands because these are great vehicles that work despite all the IP struggles that we have with them. But that is not the answer to the larger question around the North American negotiation. Mark Carney's government, he can't tweet his way out of this. He's going to have to increase awareness on this, show that he's got a heartfelt concern about this. But the answer to China is not going to be back in the wheat fields of Canada. It's probably going to be another economic measure or lever that this government's going to have to pull, perhaps through straight-up diplomacy as well.
All right. It's like you had like a clock there to time your answer, because we are right out of time. I'd like to wish our lovely panelists a happy International Cat Day, if that is, in fact, what today is. May y'all have great cat days. And I would just like to say thank you to the Power Panel, James Moore, Zane Velji, and Cameron Ahmad. Stay with us. I'm Katie Simpson. Thanks for watching Power and Politics. We've got plenty more ahead. Have a good one.